The magnitude of the Republican midterm underperformance is remarkable, particularly when put within the context of a president's typical first midterm election. In 1994, Democrats lost 54 seats in the House and 10 in the Senate. In 2002, Republicans gained 4 seats in the House and 2 in the Senate, but this anomaly is generally attributed to the country rallying around George W. Bush after 9/11. He would go on to lose 32 seats in the House during the following midterms. In 2010, Democrats lost 63 seats in the House and 6 in the Senate. In 2018, Republicans lost 41 seats in the House and gained 2 in the Senate. In every case, the fundamentals appeared to look better for the incumbent party than they did for Democrats going into this election. However, it looks like Democrats will lose just 9 seats and potentially gain a seat in the Senate, making this the best performance by an incumbent party since 1986, except for the midterm after 9/11. It's worth taking a step back and appreciating just how thin the tipping point in these elections are. If we look at the exit poll breakdown between this election and 2018, the differences are narrow enough that one would be forgiven for assuming the outcomes were similar. For example, for all the talk of the youth vote in this election, voters under 29 years old made up the same share of the electorate in 2018 as they did in this election, and fewer of them voted for Democrats. The story is similar for basically every demographic indicator, so it isn't the case that turnout broke radically different than expected, but it simply doesn't need to for there to be big changes in outcomes. This nuance was present in the election forecast, though, if not the coverage of them. If we look back at the 538 forecast, outcomes where Democrats gained seats in the House and outcomes where they lost over 20 seats were both within the 80th percentile of likelihoods. The outcome with the highest probability in their model was Republicans winning 227 seats. It only had 3.4% likelihood, and it may turn out to have only been wrong by 5-ish seats. There's a good case to be made that the only reason Republicans were still able to take the House at all, given how little the electorate changed between 2018 and now, was the opportunity to gerrymander more districts after the 2020 census. Additionally, the Supreme Court suspended without cause or explanation the Voting Rights Act's prohibition on racial gerrymandering, which gave states with Republican legislatures license to start eliminating districts with majority-minority populations, carve them up, and disperse them throughout majority-white districts, which, in effect, nullified the voices of those communities, a Jim Crow-era tactic that the Voting Rights Act in part existed to prevent. Based on analyses of existing maps, Supreme Court reporter Mark Joseph Stern estimates that Republicans districted 8 to 10 seats out of being competitive. Democrats could be celebrating a preserved, if not expanded, House majority had the courts maintained existing Voting Rights Act precedent. Democrats need to talk much more about districting when discussing the importance of appointing federal judges. 2 primary factors in the upset were the Supreme Court striking down Roe v. Wade and the growing Republican identity crisis. According to reporting by Shane Goldmacher, the primary online Democrat donation portal, ActBlue, outraised its Republican counterpart by a 2-to-1 margin following the Supreme Court decision. This renewed enthusiasm not only gave Democrats the opportunity to spend more money on educating the electorate on just how extreme many Republican candidates were, but it also caused Republicans to have to dedicate resources to more districts than they'd originally planned, which coincided with their other liability, candidate quality. Starting early this summer, President Biden and Democrats made a serious messaging effort to differentiate what they called MAGA Republicans from more mainstream conservative voters on the basis of political violence and authoritarian behavior, like attacks on elections and voting rights. This effort was sort of mocked at the time, but it seems to have stuck in many places around the country. Republicans aided them in this effort by giving so much exposure to candidates who were popular with their base, like Kari Lake, Herschel Walker, and Mehmet Oz. These candidates became the faces of the party, but they weren't particularly attractive to moderate and independent voters. Donald Trump wanted to lean into the idea of MAGA Republicans, while Mitch McConnell rightly saw it as a liability, and that identity crisis bled into the endorsements and ad spend. Exit polling shows that 36% of voters either somewhat approved or somewhat disapproved of President Biden. Democrats won the 26% that somewhat approved of Biden by 84 points, and they won those who somewhat disapproved by 4 points, which seems to have been a significant differentiator. Compare that to 2018, when Republicans lost the 8% of voters who somewhat disapproved of Donald Trump by 29 points. In other words, while approval numbers don't look much better for President Biden than they did for Trump, voters' disapproval of Biden hasn't had nearly as much effect down ballot, and that has everything to do with how extreme voters find many Republican candidates to be. So long as Donald Trump is handpicking Republican candidates, those candidates will struggle with persuadable voters. Even in an off-year election where all the fundamentals were against Democrats, Democrats still won moderate voters who made up 40% of the electorate by 15 points. Of the 8 election-denying candidates who ran for offices that would have some authority over election outcomes in 2024 battleground states, none of them have been successful. And of the election deniers that were running in competitive races, fewer than 10% were successful. In other words, voters made Republicans pay for their continued extremism.